Hello everyone! While version 3 of the 7.0 beta didn't bring that many changes to the upcoming new characters releasing with snezhnaya, the end of the beta brought some pretty impactful changes and clarifications that affect the power level of the new units. So with me being late once again with this type of update video and with the official live stream approaching very soon, I want to quickly go over all the important buffs and nerfs that were made and how they impact the upcoming characters. And all the changes I will highlight were compiled by various individuals over at the Jstern mains Discord, big thanks to them. First, the version 4 beta changes. Mizuki C1 gives her extra instances of damage in her Dream Drifter state. In Stellar Swirl teams, this extra damage is Stellar Swirl damage scaling with Mizuki's Elemental Mastery. The multiplier for this has been nerfed from 600% of Mizuki's EM to 400% of her EM. Obviously not relevant if you don't have Mizuki C1, but her early constellations including her C1 and C2 are quite impactful in making her a strong Stellar Swirl DPS in terms of damage. So nerfing the Stellar Swirl damage of her C1 is quite impactful, being around a 5k DPS decrease in calcs using KQM standard. But Mizuki is still a strong Stellar Swirl DPS, especially when you consider the changes made to Odette, a key support for all Stellar related teams. Her skill got a significant buff. Odette's skill consists of two parts: her turret where she summons a dancer that deals off-field cryo damage, and her enhanced skill where Odette herself does stellar damage and then enables her turret to also deal stellar damage from off-field. In version 4 of the beta, Odette's enhanced skill where she does stellar conduct or stellar swirl damage depending on the team got a pretty big multiplier increase, making her deal more stellar damage. This buff pretty much balances out Mizuki's C1 nerf, with some calcs having an overall increase in team DPS with the Odette buff. And of course, Odette works with all other stellar related characters, meaning a damage buff for them as well. Odette's signature was also buffed to now give 10 additional stellar crit damage at max stacks now. This is nice and all, but her signature is overall still relatively weak in terms of team damage increase, being only about 4 to 5% better over the Fontaine Craftable Sword Finale of the Deep. The last thing that was changed in version 4 of the beta is the Stellar Swirl DPS set. Previously, the Chinese description of the set allowed direct stellar damage to activate the 4-piece bonus of the set. However, this is now removed, so the 4-piece is only activated if the character on field triggers the Stellar Swirl reaction. Based on people with beta sources, the set never actually worked with direct Stellar Swirl damage, but because the Chinese description contradicted this, the intended function was unclear until now. So what does this all mean? This means that the Stellar Swirl DPS set only works if you are an on-field Anemo character. This is because you can only trigger Stellar Swirl when you apply Anemo onto an enemy with Cryo. If you apply Anemo then Cryo, nothing happens. That's just how Anemo works. For an Anemo Stellar Swirl DPS like Mizuki, she can still use this set perfectly fine. The set doesn't fully synergize with her since she mainly scales with Elemental Mastery, not attack, making 4-piece Viridescent Venerer or 4-piece Gilded Dreams competitive options, but the new Stellar Swirl DPS set on Mizuki is still fine. But for Cryo characters like Sandrone or Cryo Traveler who can deal direct Stellar Swirl damage with their abilities in Stellar Swirl teams, the new 4-piece Stellar Swirl DPS set will not work on them. They can't trigger the reaction, so they can't use this set. Because of this, Sandrone's new best set as a DPS in Stellar Swirl teams are going to be 2-piece 2-piece attack or 4-piece wins. If you actually farm the set, 4-piece wins is better than 2-piece 2-piece because it gives 18% and 25% attack instead of 18 plus 18, and then you just forget about the 20% crit rate that requires 2 Hexarai characters. And for the Cryo Traveler, they will now generally use 4-piece Tenacity of the Millilith to give an attack buff for the team, as their skill in Stellar Swirl teams provides off-field damage. These set choices are a downgrade compared to being able to use the Stellar Swirl DPS set, but the Odette buffs kinda compensate for the worst set choices when considering the overall team damage. With this artifact set change, it does suggest that HOYOMiX's intention is to favor Anemo Stellar Swirl DPSs for the Stellar Swirl archetype over Cryo ones. For example, Sandrone starting in 7.0 can be a Stellar Conduct or a Stellar Swirl DPS, and initially, the thought was that she would be top meta for both archetypes. In reality, Sandrone is solid in Stellar Swirl teams, but they do deal considerably less damage than her best Stellar Conduct teams. And with the Stellar Swirl DPS artifact change, it does look like her Stellar Swirl teams are intended to not be as strong as her Stellar Conduct ones. And this kinda makes sense because otherwise you could just pull one DPS that's very strong for both Stellar Conduct and Stellar Swirl and just be done, when HOYOMiX probably wants you to pull different characters for each niche. Obviously the damage difference isn't that relevant in general gameplay and easier combat content, but in the hardest endgame content like Dire Stygian Onslaught, this definitely matters. An Anemo Yai equivalent for Stellar Swirl teams could exist in the future that would greatly benefit Cryo Stellar Swirl DPSs, but considering that the set has been reported to only work on on-fielders, there is a possibility possibility that there will be no new off-field Animo Stellar Swirl supports, which was a rumor that was spreading around, and this would further favor Animo Stellar Swirl DPSs with off-field Cryo characters. So personally, I am expecting future Animo Stellar Swirl DPSs to be and remain significantly better than any Cryo ones outside of the Tsaritsa if she actually becomes primarily a Stellar DPS. Now this would have been the end of the version 4 beta changes, but there was a surprising hotfix that happened a day later, where HOYOMiX made all of Alyosha's damage buffs only apply to the on-field character, which includes his attack buff and stellar conduct damage buff in his base kit, and the extra EM from his C6. We also found out that his healing is also not team-wide but single target, which was apparently always the case based on the Chinese description. Alyosha's buffs no longer being team-wide is a massive nerf to his overall power level in stellar conduct teams, because the best stellar conduct teams have Yai and Odette, who deal off-field stellar conduct damage. Odette still goes on field with her enhanced skill that deals stellar conduct damage, so that still gets buffed by Alyosha, but her turret damage won't get buffed now, and pretty much all of Yai's damage is off-field, so she's not benefiting much from Alyosha anymore. Because of this nerf, stellar conduct teams with C6 Alyosha lost around 20k DPS in calcs using KQM standard. For example, if the Sandrone Yai Odette C6 Alyosha team was calcing at around 200 to 210k DPS, now it's calcing at around 180 to 190k DPS. Obviously, the teams with C6 Alyosha are still very strong damage wise, and the stellar conduct DPSs are still looking to be top tier, but C6 Alyosha is no longer the clear best option. Depending on the Theorycrafter, Alyosha's performance varies. Some still have him as the best support as C6, while many others have him worse than supports like C6 Chi-Chi and Escoffier. I think the general conclusion here is that with the nerfs, C6 Alyosha is no longer the clear best final support for stellar conduct teams. He's still one of the best at C6, but other supports are either similar or arguably better than him. And yes, that means if you don't have his C6, then he's really not that useful for any stellar conduct teams unless you really have no other alternative support options. Now in stellar conduct teams without Yai, the nerfs aren't as impactful because without Yai, a larger portion of the team's damage is done by your on-fielder. So C6 Alyosha plus Odette, if you are lucky enough to get C6 Alyosha, is still the best alternative over Yai in stellar conduct teams. But outside of that, Alyosha has definitely lost a lot of pull value. In a way, the nerf is a good thing because the teams with C6 Alyosha previously were outputting some very high DPS numbers, so this does kinda limit power creep. But on the other hand, Alyosha now doesn't look that potent of a support to get anymore. The stellar conduct teams are still outputting high numbers without him, and there is now a higher possibility of a new 5-star stellar conduct support in the future that will continue the damage power creep anyways. The last thing I want to highlight is that after version 5 of the beta, HOYOMiX finally fixed a bug regarding Cryo Traveler's Burst in Stellar Conduct teams. For the entirety of the beta, when Cryo Traveler's Burst was used in Stellar Conduct teams to deal Stellar Conduct damage, its damage wasn't actually buffed by the Polestar field stacks, which increased Stellar Conduct damage. This may not seem like that big of an issue, but not taking into account the stacks is like a 10k DPS difference for Stellar Conduct Cryo Traveler. It really didn't make sense that the burst would be left out of this damage buff, but after a bunch of weeks, this is fixed, confirming that this was always a bug. Ultimately, this means that Cryo Traveler is looking to remain a very strong free-to-play unit to build in snezhnaya. Those were all the important final changes, at least as of now, that were made for the upcoming 7.0 characters. I hope you found this brief update video helpful in any way. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming guides I will be making for the release of snezhnaya, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.